Bienvenidos a la primera entrega del programa The Journey to Investment Ready República Dominicana. Este programa busca ampliar el apoyo y el conocimiento alrededor de inversión, tanto para dueños de negocio como para inversionistas, mentores e instituciones que apoyan el ecosistema de emprendimiento en el
Buenas noches. En 5 minutos daremos inicio a la conferencia.
Bienvenidos a la primera entrega del programa The Journey to Investment Ready, República Dominicana. Este programa busca ampliar el apoyo y el conocimiento alrededor de inversión, tanto para dueños de negocio como para inversionistas, mentores e instituciones que apoyan el ecosistema de emprendimiento. Bienvenidos a la primera entrega del programa The Journey to Investment Ready, República Dominicana. Este programa busca ampliar el apoyo y el conocimiento alrededor de inversión, tanto para dueños de negocio como para inversionistas, mentores e instituciones que apoyan el ecosistema de emprendimiento en el trayecto de proveer y recibir fondos de inversión. Contaremos con la participación de Carla Deering, inversionista, 3 veces fundadora FinTech y CEO de Velo Group. Lorraine Pendleton, inversionista, abogada y socia principal de Portfolio Rising America Funds. Natalia Bishop, inversionista, socio general de Renew VC, directora de Innovación y Emprendimiento de la Universidad de Louisville. Raúl Hoyo, director general de Altio, Sociedad Administradora de Fondos de Inversión. María Virginia Almúdezi, economista, inversionista, experta en gestión de riesgos y gobierno corporativo y presidente de Enlaces, red de inversionistas ángeles. Daris Estrella, conferencista, autora, experta en mercado de valores y veterana de Wall Street. Esta conferencia es una iniciativa de la Embajada de los Estados Unidos en Santo Domingo en alianza con Velo Group, Wild Accelerator, Instituto Cultural Dominico-Americano, Enlaces, red de inversionistas ángeles y Palante Dominicana. Bienvenidos a The Journey to Investment Ready, República Dominicana.
Aportar al crecimiento de nuestro ecosistema de emprendimiento en el país, abriendo conversaciones desde los Estados Unidos junto a la República Dominicana, pues para poner a la disposición de nuestros emprendedores, inversionistas y servidores públicos, pues esas oportunidades y entender y analizar un poquito más profundamente que la realidad de lo que estamos viviendo el día de hoy. Es por esto que este programa no solamente comprende esta conferencia, sino también que sigue de una serie de talleres de inversiones para inversionistas, emprendedores e instituciones para poder de nuevo aportar a la educación en materia de inversión. Y pues nos sentimos muy emocionados porque por muchos meses estuvimos trabajando en un programa que no solamente se quedara en la parte analítica, sino que esto se pueda traducir en la parte accionable y que podamos realmente ir dando pasos para poder crecer el ecosistema de emprendimiento. Y antes de iniciar, les recuerdo que esta conferencia va a ser conducida tanto en español como en inglés. La primera parte vamos a escucharla en español y la segunda parte con los keynotes y el panel lo vamos a sostener en inglés. Así es que tenemos traducción simultánea donde pueden adquirir un pequeño aparato. Si no lo han hecho al momento, pueden hacerlo en la entrada. Y también agradecer a la presencia de todos los que nos acompañan de manera digital a través de la transmisión en vivo. Pues sin más, quisiera invitar al escenario al director ejecutivo del Dominico-Americano, el ingeniero Ramón Sosa, para dar inicio a esta conferencia con unas palabras de bienvenida, para quien pido un fuerte aplauso.
Buenas noches, Alex, título. Buenas noches, Miyuki. Buenas noches, panelistas, expositores. Buenas noches, damas y caballeros. Justo anoche, allá afuera, aquí en la Plaza del Estudiante, en las palabras de bienvenida a una actividad programada por la Embajada de los Estados Unidos, el presidente del Consejo de Directores del Instituto Cultural Dominico-Americano expresaba: la relación del Dominico y la Embajada se basa y sustenta en la colaboración, en la confianza, en el deseo de una sociedad más justa y desarrollada, en el apoyo, en la comprensión de que más que una relación bilateral entre nuestras dos instituciones, se trata de nuestros países. Indicaba también que los lazos que nos unen han permitido que esa combinación de iniciativas propias y los cientos de proyectos apoyados o promovidos desde la Embajada para beneficio de nuestro país nos impulsan a expandir nuestra misión a lo largo del tiempo, sirviendo juntos a la sociedad dominicana a través de estrategias de impacto social para nuestro país. Como si no quisiéramos dejar enfriar estas palabras, hoy estamos aquí, sirviendo de anfitriones para la conferencia The Journey to Investment Ready, que marca el inicio de un programa gratuito de 4 días auspiciado por la Embajada de los Estados Unidos en Santo Domingo, para ampliar el apoyo y el conocimiento alrededor de inversión, tanto para dueños de negocio como para inversionistas, mentores e instituciones que apoyan el emprendimiento. Si se analizaran los términos que mejor describen a un emprendedor, pues encontramos creatividad, ingenio, pasión, visión, liderazgo, paciencia, confianza, responsabilidad y decisión. Pero la verdad es que en el trayecto de el proceso para convertir esas grandes ideas en realidades, se necesita mucho más. Se necesita normalmente acompañamiento, se necesita asesoría, se necesitan muchas herramientas para mejorar las probabilidades de éxito, se necesitan recursos, contactos, inversiones. De esto se trata la jornada que hoy inicia, de propiciar esos puntos de encuentro entre iniciativas interesantes de desarrollo, las grandes personas que las crean, que las diseñan, y aquellos que ya tienen experiencias para compartir y acompañarlas en el camino. Agradezco nuevamente a la Embajada y a las instituciones que propician y apoyan esta iniciativa, que han diseñado, y auguramos grandes éxitos para la jornada de hoy y para el futuro. Bienvenidos a su casa y gracias por escogernos.
Muchas gracias, ingeniero Sosa. Escuchemos ahora unas palabras del ministro consejero interino de la Embajada, Alexander Títolo, para quien pido un fuerte aplauso.
Buenas noches. Es un gran placer estar aquí con ustedes hoy. Gracias, Ramón, como siempre, por invitarnos a su casa. Es ahí que quiero empezar con un agradecimiento a nuestros socios aquí en el Instituto Cultural Dominico-Americano, Mon y su equipo, por ser nuestro aliado en la creación de iniciativas como esta y por ser siempre un ejemplo de lo que es una asociación verdadera y eficaz. Gracias. Esta no es la primera vez que subo a este escenario para hablar sobre la importancia del emprendimiento, y sé que no será la última. La última vez fue hace pocos meses para elogiar el trabajo de las participantes dominicanas en la Academia para Mujeres Emprendedoras, o OA, por sus siglas en inglés. Hasta el momento, a través de OA, hemos capacitado a 116 mujeres empresarias y brindando tutoría y capacitación empresarial a estas empresas dirigidas por mujeres. Llevamos a cabo programas como OA y también la iniciativa para jóvenes líderes de las Américas, Wildlife, en apoyo a nuestro profundo compromiso con el desarrollo equitativo. Esto es tanto en embajadas de Estados Unidos aquí en Santo Domingo como en otras embajadas estadounidenses alrededor del mundo, porque como nación creemos profundamente que los empresarios y las pequeñas empresas son elementos críticos para construir sociedades equitativas. No solo brindan empleos y oportunidades de crecimiento, sino que empresas pequeñas también amplían la resiliencia económica, especialmente en tiempos de incertidumbre. De hecho, si la reciente crisis del COVID-19 nos enseñó algo, fue que las pequeñas empresas son una parte clave de nuestras vidas y a menudo son las más adaptables cuando surgen nuevos desafíos y oportunidades. También creemos que los empresarios deben recibir apoyo para hacer la transición a administrar una pequeña empresa, una vez que hayan validado que existe un mercado para sus productos. Dar ese salto requiere capital y eso no es siempre fácil de conseguir. Por lo tanto, atraer inversiones es la clave. Sin embargo, hemos escuchado de nuestros becarios, expertos, muchos que están aquí con nosotros esta noche, y otros contactos aquí en la República Dominicana, lo difícil que es crear una estructura y una cultura organizacional que promueva y sostenga la recepción y gestión de inversiones para pequeñas empresas. Es por eso que apoyamos esta conferencia como parte de nuestros esfuerzos más amplios para apoyar el espíritu empresarial. Creemos que es importante aprender los unos de los otros sobre cómo hacer esto, conocer dónde y cómo han logrado ser exitosos y establecer contactos y conexiones. Por lo tanto, estoy orgulloso de nuestros socios y del equipo de la embajada dirigida por Lidia por crear espacios como este. Y estoy feliz de que ustedes estén aquí hoy. Espero que no solo aprendan a comprender el sistema, sino que también apliquen las estrategias aprendidas aquí para asegurarse de que sus negocios sean exitosos y alcanzan a su máximo potencial. Hablando de potencial, todos aquí saben que los Estados Unidos y la República Dominicana tienen una relación comercial de larga data. Y estoy seguro que como gente de negocios, todos ustedes son buenos con los números, así que le voy a compartir uno para ilustrar. En 2021, la Asociación Comercial Dominico-Estadounidense generó más de 17 mil millones de dólares de actividad económica. Este sí es un gran número y apoya el sustento de dominicanos y estadounidenses por igual. Pero queremos que este número crezca a través de empresas estadounidenses que eligen hacer negocios aquí en la República Dominicana, así como a través de las empresas dominicanas que quieren trabajar en los Estados Unidos. El potencial está ahí. Sabemos, sin embargo, que la labor de promover los lazos económicos no corresponde solo a las grandes empresas. También son ustedes, los empresarios y propietarios de pequeñas empresas, quienes hacen el trabajo creativo de innovar y resolver problemas. Pero también tienen necesidades específicas a la hora de atraer inversión, que es lo que trata el evento de hoy. Por último, si bien creo que todos saben esto, pero lo diré de todos modos. El potencial para una relación comercial aún mayor entre nuestros países no es solo un número. Se trata de construir las sociedades en las que todos queremos vivir. Una de las mejores cosas de los emprendedores es la voz que traen cuando encuentran el éxito. En todo el mundo, los empresarios y propietarios de pequeñas empresas son voces a favor de la transparencia y la equidad, a menudo empujando contra intereses arraigados para realizar su potencial. En los Estados Unidos, esto nos hace un país más fuerte y más equitativo. Y veo esa misma dinámica aquí en la República Dominicana. Permíteme concluir agradeciendo una vez más a quienes nos han ayudado a tener éxito en nuestro trabajo. El Instituto Cultural Dominico-Americano por hacer posible esta conferencia. También agradecemos a la ex becaria, donde está Miyuki, por su liderazgo en este proyecto y por salvarme de esta planta aquí que me estaba atacando. No, de verdad, Miyuki es Es una líder muy importante en todo este proyecto y estamos muy orgullosos y felices de trabajar con ella. Construir un negocio no es algo que ustedes hacen solo y tampoco lo es organizar un evento como esto. Nosotros en la embajada estamos muy agradecidos de tener tan buenos socios como todos ustedes y estamos agradecidos con ustedes por asistir hoy. Esperamos que salga de esta conferencia recargado y investment ready. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, señor Título. La verdad es que para mí es un placer poder acompañar y ser parte de programas e iniciativas como esta de la mano de la Embajada de los Estados Unidos en Santo Domingo. Bien, pues a partir de este momento vamos a pasar al primer keynote de la noche y en este momento vamos a pasar al idioma inglés. It's a great honor for me to introduce our first guest speaker from the United States. She has been working in finance and fintech for the past 20 years. She has 10 years working in the nonprofit sector. She's a 3-time startup founder. She's part of Commonwealth Seed Capital Fund, and through her work with the investments of various foundations, she's currently with 30-plus hedge, private equity, and real asset funds across the investment style spectrum. She has also served as an advisor and trustee to select high net worth families. Here to present her keynote, Journey to Investment Ready, as a framework that connects founders with the partners and capitals they need, please welcome Carla Deary.
Thank you, Miyuki. And thank you, everyone, for being here tonight to join in this conversation. We have a shared goal. How can we engage, support, and connect more and more entrepreneurs with the partners and capital they need in today's market and build big, successful businesses and wealth in families and communities that changes lives? Over the past 5 years, my colleagues and I, in the leadership of Wild Accelerator, have been working to grow investments in our own region, specifically for those who previously have not had exposure to the education and relationships and the capital that it takes to do this. Our region is in the middle of the country in the United States, right between the go-go investment areas in the east, Boston, New York, and in the west, California, Seattle. We're in what they call the flyover states. But we have our advantages too. We have strong logistics market, proximity to major markets in every direction. If you want to cross to anywhere, you have to come through us. And that's why the major American shippers, UPS and FedEx, are in our region. And also, as my colleague who's on the panel, Natalia, says, we're nice humans. We work hard. But maybe our biggest advantage when we started out those 5 years ago is that our entrepreneurial market was only working for a privileged few and not for all the rest of us. We had to find a different playbook. And we're part of a growing movement in the U.S. to engage, support, and fund underrepresented founders and attract outside investors and grow investors who are excited to fund them. So early in that journey, in July of 2019, a few of us had the opportunity to come here and meet officials, investors, and founders to learn about your ecosystem. Then and now, we've noted that the dynamics of our underrepresented founder marketplace have some striking similarities to experiences here. And I want to explore some of those elements for our discussion tonight. But first, to define what do we mean by underrepresented founders in the U.S. market. That's people of color, women, LGBTQ founders, first-generation immigrants, people in lower-income households, people with disabilities. The language is fluid because some people feel the term underrepresented has a negative connotation, and they'd rather replace it by more positive terms. undeniable, unrelenting. There's also DEI investments, which is used in some of the data I'm showing here today. That DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's a synonym for underrepresented. In the sense that it can be understood as not fully served by all of the education, resources, and relationships that are needed to nurture a robust startup ecosystem. So back in 2019, there were studies of representation in the VC world in the US, and they were a wake-up call for many people. 71% of founders were white. Let me back up. 71 of founders that received venture capital funds were white. 1% of venture capital founders were black. Women-founded startups received only 9% investments. Latino founders made up 1.8%. Middle Easterners, 2.8%. Asians were the second most backed group, making up 17.7% of venture-backed founders. Hence the need for this movement like ours to raise awareness and find support and solutions. This intervening period was, of course, a period of the COVID pandemic, but it was also a time of racial and civil strife in the US, and one of the most visible incidents was in our own city of Louisville, with the killing of Breonna Taylor by the police and the protests in the aftermath. Speaking for myself, this brought incredible urgency to our efforts and woke many funders, nonprofit and for-profit, to the cause of supporting underrepresented companies and communities. So is it a movement? I'm going to say yes. There's newer data published in November 22. Have it here? Next slide, please. Go back one, please. In November 22, a group called Diversity VC looked at the amount of underrepresented founder investment in the US. And what you see on the right is that the number of funds stating that they can and will invest in DEI investments is actually catching on a bit, 43%. But still only 1.87% has been allocated to startups with diverse founders. Now, Diversity VC itself has been around for 5 years, and with the aim of building a more diverse and inclusive VC ecosystem across the world by getting data like this in front of us. And this data came from the $31 billion that's held by the 200 largest venture capital funds in the US. So we'll hear more from our other keynote speaker, Lorene, about the money out there for underrepresented founders. From some real name brands and a cadre of emerging managers. But in terms of this data, if the money is there, if the aspiration is there, why aren't we seeing it in more funding for underrepresented founders? The related study that Diversity VC did also last summer, and this was based on responses from 213 venture capital firms. VC looked at that too, and basically said, nope. They found that the major VC... The fourth one, equity crowdfunding. The idea that previously all investment had to come from large investors and accredited investors, but due to our new regulations, small investors can make investments in startups. And that is starting to make a difference in our market because we have institutions who are willing to put a match against those smaller investors to help underrepresented founders and others grow. So that's been an important contributor to our investment landscape. And in the last few days, in talking with your investors and your officials, it's been identified as something that the government and the embassy could consider working on going forward. This chart is complicated, and I really wish someone had taught me all this at the beginning of my journey. But do you necessarily have to raise capital? No. When it comes to startups in general, there's all kinds of different capital. First of all, 77% of small businesses rely on personal savings for their initial funds. A third of small businesses in the US start with less than $5,000. But the average small business requires about $10,000 in startup capital. Only 0.5% of startups raise venture capital. Tell the press that. And the average business line of credit is $22,000. So that's a significant driver for capital if you're not ready to raise capital yet. And interestingly, in our market, that always used to be traditional bank debt, but now there are a lot of new online lenders where you can get access to lines of credit much more easily. I'm emphasizing this because most of us that work in the ecosystem spend a whole lot of time with founders that don't raise venture capital. And we do a whole lot of good, and they do a whole lot of good along the way. Also, for many companies, capital of all kinds can be gotten through strategic partnerships, like taking an investment or other types of financing from a key client or a supplier. That would be like a local cosmetics company here with products for Caribbean skin, taking investment from their manufacturer packaging partner. Real example, by the way. Next slide, please. But if you do want and need to raise venture capital, things are changing a bit. For one thing, seed rounds are larger. The average seed round is 2.2 million now, and that's in comparison to 700,000 10 years ago. But your business has to be more mature to get a seed round than in the past. The median company running a seed funding round now is 3 years old. And 10 years ago, that was just a little over 1 year. So though venture capital funding is growing, VC firms are taking fewer risks on brand new startups and giving more to more mature startups, something we need to know. And of startups that do raise seed rounds, 1% reach unicorn status, which is the $1 billion valuation. One other little piece of information to tuck away is that startups with 2 co-founders, rather than 1, raise 30% more capital, as an indication of balance and well-roundedness that investors like to see. So many startups don't have the knowledge or the experience to imagine how to make their business big enough to attract capital. We learned in meetings this week that this is another similarity or a shared barrier that we have together. A potential, your colleagues called it thinking like an island. A potential solution to help founders think bigger is to help them understand the scalable revenue models that work for others. Initially, just as a way to break the cultural barrier of thinking bigger and maybe less local. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on revenue models, but we did discuss in the last few days that training on revenue models and studying revenue models is probably a really great thing to bring up in the whole educational process. An example of this is, are you like Amazon, where you sell other people's products and take a commission? That's the markup model on here. Are you like Duolingo, where you promote a freemium software technology platform and reserve special features for those paying you monthly or yearly? That's the B2C subscription model. So understanding your model is important because it serves as a roadmap, not only on how to make money by how others have done it, but also how to get big and how to get. But in truth, it really wouldn't matter if there was a lot more written about this, about the reality of all of this, because founders would ignore it anyway. I know because I ignored it myself. Next slide, please. We created a beautiful app that would help every single person improve their individual financial picture and their financial legacy for their family. People would love to have a better financial picture, but guess what? They will not do or pay anything to get it, is what we found out. And when we switch to a business model where we sell to employers and they give it to people for free, they still wouldn't use it. I had to find a strategic acquirer where this functionality was part of a product that more people used. Next slide, please. In this case, it was early wage access, people getting their payroll before payroll period. That was some 180's exit. It worked, but still to this day, people are not dying for financial wellness apps. But this we already knew. Founders are believers. They're optimists. They have a hard time hearing no, which is one of the reasons that many of them ultimately succeed, even if it takes a few startups to get there. For the venture capital startup founder who is ready to start the journey, the type of investment we're talking about is after the bootstrapping period, after the friends and family round, closer to the pre-seed or seed round. And in these rounds, the business is fully formed and starting to grow. That founder is ready for the journey to investment ready. We created it to break down every single requirement that founders must meet to help investors and partners say, yes, I will invest. What does that really look like? Well, many of us have stayed in an Airbnb, but did you know that Airbnb is really a top example of an investment-ready company when it first got funded, and still, of course, certainly one of the top today. Next slide, please. Now a $72 billion public company, Airbnb is actually known for having one of the best pitch decks of all time, going back to 2009 when they raised their first capital. Let's just take a minute and look. Next slide. What's the problem? Next slide. What's the solution that we offer to this problem? Next slide. How are you proving to me that this makes money and works? Is this a big market? Can you really capture some of it? What is this product? Help me understand it. Exactly how do you make money on this? Next one. What's the market adoption, the traction that you've already experienced? Yeah, sure, but who else is doing this? Oh, okay. So what are your competitive advantages relative to them? There's a huge market in the US around making gorgeous pitch decks with clarity and simplicity and great products. But what made Airbnb's pitch great is how simply, authentically, and accurately it captured the strength of the business itself. And the journey to investment ready is about that, the strength of the business itself. There's 15 elements that determine investment readiness across 4 key topics. Is it a compelling business? Can you capture a share of this compelling business? Does the business model work? And is the investment offering going to work? I promise you I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but when we talk about you'll recognize when I kind of go through this quick laundry list, you'll see Airbnb nailed it. Not the pitch deck, the business itself. Is this a compelling business? Is the problem clear? Is it powerful? Is the solution compelling? Is it crystal clear how your business works and why it solves the problem? And what does win look like? And why do clients crucially need this? What's the competitive landscape? And what's the total addressable market, the TAM, as we call it? What's your specific market opportunity in that and attainable market share? In part 2, can you actually capture some of this? Do you have the perfect product market fit? Do you have the validation? Do you have a client acquisition and retention process that you can prove works? Do you have a great go-to-market strategy? And do you have leadership that works, co-founders and culture? Part 3, does the business model work? The biggest question in that is, what's the revenue model, right? We talked about that. And as an investor, you ask, how well do you understand that revenue model, and are you fully executing on it? What are you doing for resources, and especially talent? And what really is your traction and your achievements? And then the final part, is the investment offering designed to work? What are the actual capital needs and uses of funds? How have you structured the investment offering that actually meets the needs and the interests of investors? And by the way, how do you find out what that is? What roles can the investor play in your growth? And how do you get to the close? So accelerators are structured to run through this process from idea stage through pitch stage to investors. But probably some of us in this room know you can get through an accelerator and still not be ready to be funded. The very best accelerators push founders to get all the way to investment ready. And urban legend has it that the mentor to the Airbnb founders from Y Combinator, the accelerator that they were in, which is a premier accelerator in the US, told them, shut your books, go to New York City to your top early beta clients and figure out how to make them wildly successful. And when you have done that, you have a business. Come back here and we'll start on your pitch deck again, right? So, by the way, last year, Airbnb announced that Brian Chesky, the founder and CEO, spent all of the year 2022 living 100% of his time in Airbnbs to sharpen his company's strategy and results. And my takeaway is that to stay competitive, he went back to the drawing board, fine-tuning it all. So, as the data shows, few businesses are able to nail all of the elements of investment readiness. Those that do still need to find a funder who is excited about their business. The rule of thumb is that it takes 100 pitches to get one investor. And that's why it's critical for founders to be able to plug into and access the benefits of a robust startup ecosystem, as we refer to it here in the US. This calls on the startup ecosystem builders, investors, government officials, civil society leaders, not only to provide training and education for founders, but to connect them to, I should say, education and training for founders and investors, but to connect them and foster the entire ecosystem to increase investment and business success. Next slide. It takes time. We're seeing that in the US, but the more the ecosystem improves itself, the more investment is growing. And in this way, the journey to investment ready is a shared journey. We share a goal together, all of us. Is all this possible? Is the market ready for more underserved founders? Is the market ready for underserved markets? Yeah, it's possible. If founders have the education, the exposure, the mobility, the social proof, the mentors, the business knowledge, then investors can see them. Let's keep making it happen together.
Impressive keynote. Let's now introduce our second guest speaker from the United States. She's a seasoned VC advisor and attorney with extensive experience in the legal, technology, and entertainment industries. She was named by Mergers and Acquisition as the 2021 Top 25 Most Influential Women in Mid-Market M&A, and by Worth Magazine as one of the 16 financial powerhouses. She is currently the lead partner of Portfolio Rising America Funds 1 and 2, which invests in companies with founders of color, women, LGBTQI+, or companies with products or services addressing those markets. Here to present her keynote, Investing Principles and Trends for Working with Diverse Founders Located in Overlooked Markets, Let's welcome Lorene Pendleton.
Buenas noches. Hi, I'm Lorene Pendleton, and I come from the United States. I live in actually Harlem, New York, so some of you may be familiar with Harlem because I'm near Washington Heights, which has a big Dominican population. So can you move to the next slide, please? So today I'm going to talk about, give a bit about my background, how I got into investing, then also talk about the investments I've made, the track record that I have. Then I'm going to also talk about U.S. trends in funding the underserved markets, and then I'm going to walk you through a few case studies of one company that I invested in is very successful, and then also some interesting funding models, not typical like equity and VC, which could be applied to here in the Dominican Republic possibly. And then I'll conclude. Next slide, please. So a bit about me. So I've had a varied career. I started out as a lawyer. I worked at big law firms, but actually when I started my legal career, I worked at a small boutique entertainment law firm. We represented celebrity clients like Prince. I'm sure you heard of him, Shaka Khan, Stevie Wonder, and then also represented a record label where we had DMX. I worked on, fun fact, I worked on the first hip hop tour in arenas. They were all at small venues with Jay-Z and DMX. I was a lawyer that helped put that tour together. So I had a strong entertainment background. But then I actually shifted gears when I saw, I'm kind of dating myself, but the internet had just come out, and I saw that this was going to be a disruptor. And so I decided to join a couple of startups. So I actually have worked at startups. I helped build, I was like one of the first employees at 3 companies. 2 actually were sold and exited. So I know what it takes to build a successful company. And then actually how I got into investing is about a decade ago when I heard that less than 1% of VC dollars went to Black founders. Now, mind you, I worked at startup companies. We were all venture-backed, and I knew the importance of growth equity and getting capital when you needed it. And I could not believe when I heard that stat, that less than 1% of dollars went to Black founders. And so I said I wanted to change that. Great, I never invested, I invested in the stock market, but never in private companies. And so literally, I'd say the universe conspired, because 3 weeks later, I heard about a program called Pipeline Angels, which trains women to become angel investors. So I applied to that program, I got in, and that was a decade ago. I graduated and made my first investment. So as an angel investor, you're investing your own money. As a venture capitalist, you raise money. You also put in some of your money as well, but you're investing on behalf of your investors, and you want to invest in really great companies. And so fast forward, in 2019, I launched a fund, which I'll talk a bit about. And that was one of the first funds that was led by a team of all Black and Latino women, 5 of us. Also, some of the other things that I do before I jump into the fund, I do some advisory work. I advise a company called Storage, which has a valuation of $300 million. I sit on the audit and compensation committee for that board. Also, I'm an alumni of Brown University. I'm on the President's Council, president of the university, her council on entrepreneurship. So I sit on that council, and I was an entrepreneur in residence for the Nelson Center, which is the entrepreneur center at Brown. And then also I was most recently appointed to the University of Buffalo, which is a school in Buffalo, to be on their endowment committee. Next slide, please. Next slide. So while the slide is coming up, I wanted to highlight my team. Okay, so this is the fund that I launched in 2019, Portfolio Rising America. We have Fund 1 and 2. As I mentioned, it was the first fund in the United States led by a team of all Black and Latino women. Our first fund was $6 million. Our second fund was $8 million. This team is, I would say, probably the dream team. If people remember Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, this is the dream team for VC. So we have Karen Carr. She's actually a PhD in chemistry. She was the youngest person to get a degree, a PhD at the University of Chicago when she was 25 years old. She's been in the VC space for 25 years. We also have Daphne Dufresne, who actually runs a $2.5 billion private equity fund, but she started her career out in VC. And then myself, you know, my background, we have Norma Cadena. She has not 1, but 3 degrees from MIT. Literally she started her career as a rocket scientist working at Boeing with rockets. And then we have Juliana Grazier, who has a background working with Texas Medical Ventures, was a $100 million fund now. She heads up Greentown Labs, focused on green and sustainability. So this is a team. Combined, we have over 50 years investment experience. Next slide, please. So let me tell you a little bit about the companies that we invested in. This is our first fund. So as you see, we invested across various industry sectors because of the depth of our team and backgrounds. A couple of things to highlight: we invested in fintech, so financial services, but with tech-enabled. One of the companies that's really interesting is Mocafy. The founder was an executive at JP Morgan Chase, one of the largest banks in the United States. He created a bank for the under and unbanked using your mobile device. You have access to, you can take a picture of your check and it's uploaded to your bank account. You also get a debit card. One of the things that I didn't know until we were doing due diligence, 70 million people, 70 million people in the United States are either unbanked or underbanked, meaning they don't have a bank account, or they have to use check cashing places and that kind of thing, and they pay a lot of fees for that. And so he created a company which now has raised a Series B, is on and doing really well to basically deal with that market. Another interesting company is Maven, and that's in the health tech space. It's actually a women's health company, telehealth. So basically, women can have access to medical doctors and providers either online, like a Zoom-like kind of setting, or telephone. This company was launched about 5 years ago. As you can imagine, during the pandemic, its growth was accelerated. When we made the investment, the company is valued at $200 million. It's now valued at $1.3 billion. It is actually the first women's health company in the United States to be a unicorn, and what a unicorn is valued over $1 billion. So we're really proud of that investment. And then another interesting investment, Kelnella Media, which is one of the case studies, which I'll talk about. It's in the media entertainment and streaming service. Let's move to the next slide, please. And these are some of the other companies that we've invested out of our fund too. We currently are still investing. We have a bit more money left. A couple of highlights. We invested in climate sustainability with Kaban and this other company, which is really interesting. So we've extended our reach in terms of sectors. We actually did follow-on funding with Kelnella Media and also an interesting company, Madison Reed. Madison Reed is a later stage company. We invested it out of our first fund. Really interesting company, a consumer, direct-to-consumer company, but also sells retail and wholesale, coloring, hair coloring for women, which is an interesting, women of a certain age, over 40, color their hair, about 60% color their hair every 6 to 8 weeks. So really big market. In the height of COVID, she was doing about $175 million annually and is growing. So that's a really another great company that we invested in. Next slide, please. And then I've also made my own, as I mentioned, angel investments. So this is my own investments that I made. So an interesting company, Aura. I don't know if you've heard of that. Aura Ring, it's actually a sleeping tracking device. I invested in that company about 2.5 years ago. It's gone on, they didn't have a Super Bowl ad this year. They had one last year. When we made the investment, the company was worth about, when I made the investment, the company was worth about $200 million. It's now worth $2 billion. And so definitely a great acquisition target, possibly Apple or Google, who wants to get into the wearable device market. One of my companies that I invested in was one of my first investments about 8 years ago. Hired & Squire was recently acquired last month, which was great. And then another company is TrackLight, which is an intellectual property audit company. Let's go to the next slide, please. So for all the work that I've done, next slide, please, I've been gotten some really great press. Was in mergers and acquisition. I was featured in a BlackRock campaign on what is worth talking about the importance of, investing if you have the money, and then particularly if you're a woman or a person of color, to invest in early stage companies. I was featured in Marie Claire, one of the 50 most connected women, as well as Inc. magazine. Can you advance to the next slide, please? I was featured in Yahoo Finance, actually, in the height of COVID. after George Floyd, talking about why it's important, Black entrepreneurs matter, why that's really important to fund these founders, and then Huffington Post and other publications. I was also featured in October at PitchBook, which is kind of the authority for tracking the venture capital world. I was featured as one of the women VCs talking about a state of entrepreneurship and VC dollars that flow to women. Next slide, please. And not only was I've been featured, but our portfolio companies that I talked about were featured. So Mocafy, I mentioned that company, that's the bank for under and unbanked. He was featured in the New York Times. We invested in an interesting company called Rares. He's a former NFL player, and then he went on to go to Harvard Business School. If people are sneakerheads, they collect sneakers. A lot of people in the United States do. They basically acquire very rare and collectible sneakers, kind of one of one, and they created securities out of them, SEC-approved securities. So a fintech company, but in an area that's really, really, really interesting. And then also another company, Goalsetter, a fintech company that we invested in. Next slide. So now I'm going to shift gears now to talk about the trends in funding underserved markets. Next slide, please. So one of the things about underserved markets, most of them, so when we say underserved markets, Carla mentioned what those were, people of color, Black, Latino, Asian, Native Americans, LGBTQ, women. A lot of those businesses are service businesses. If you look at other types of businesses that are not, non-underserved or, majority white, they tend to be not just service business, but also technology businesses. And so service businesses, you think about a hair salon, a nail salon, childcare, recycling, a restaurant. And so the fact that those companies are service businesses impacts the revenue. So tech-enabled businesses actually, have a greater opportunity to scale and generate a lot more revenue because of the scalability of it. A lot of these service businesses are what we call lifestyle businesses, and nothing's wrong with a lifestyle business. Basically, a lifestyle business provides revenue for the owner, and they probably have some employees. But the question is, what happens if they become incapacitated or they pass away? With a scalable business, that business will tend to live on. A non-scalable business, a lifestyle business won't. The other thing about it is these types of businesses are 3 to 5 times more likely to be started by founders of color versus, non-founders of color or non-underserved markets. And so the options for capital for these types of businesses are a lot less options. And so that's also probably a reason why, a lot of founders of color, women, are not getting one reason. I mean, obviously there's a lot of other reasons, but one of the reasons why they may not be getting the capital that they should be getting. Let's go to the next slide, please. I'm going to talk about the funding disparity from the underserved markets in 2022. So this is coming off of 2021, where you had women, Black-led companies, Latino-led companies were having record numbers of funding, VC funding. Mind you, the VC landscape in the United States is about $240 billion with a B. And so it's very big. They were coming off a record, but the amount of money that they were getting was paltry in comparison to the market size. Let's go to 2022. The markets have shifted. And so actually that funding actually declined across every underserved market. There's a saying that someone said, when white founders or white people in the United States get a cold, Blacks, Latinos, they get pneumonia. And so basically, I'm not surprised that the funding has gone down for these groups. So let me just kind of go through the stats. So Latinos, they got 1.5% of venture dollars in 2022 versus in 2021, they received 2.5%. So it went down. If you look at Blacks, actually 2021 was a record number of funding for Blacks, finally crept up above 1%. I told you that 1%, and that's what got me into venture. It crept up a bit, However, it dropped 45% decrease in financing and funding for blacks. And then women, in 2022, they had 1.9% of funding, which was a drop from 2021. So the bottom line is, we know the markets have shifted in the United States, actually globally, and the people who are getting most impacted, who are already not getting a lot of funding, are now getting, catching pneumonia when everyone else is catching a cold. Next slide, please. So I touched a little bit on the lifestyle business versus a scalable business, but I wanted to give you an example. So think about a barbershop, your neighborhood barbershop or your hair salon. That's a lifestyle business. You have an owner, they make money, that's fine, that's great. However, it's not a scalable business. We look at a company called Squire, which I happen to know, really interesting company. It's what you call a SaaS, software as a service company. So these two gentlemen, they would go to the barber shop. They would have to wait like an hour, hour and a half because their barber didn't take appointments. They have to pay cash because their barber didn't, take credit cards. So they said, you know what? I'm gonna start an app where I will offer it to barbershop owners. They were writing down appointments in a book and basically take the barbershop and tech-enable that business. That is now a highly scalable business. So it's a booking, a barbershop has this, B2B software program where they can offer to their clients that they can book up their hair salons or their barbershop appointments, and then also allow their customers to pay for it. And so they did that. This company launched, I believe it was like 5 or 6 years ago. They've raised $170 million. They're valued at $700 million. The last round that they raised money 2 years ago, Tiger Global, which is one of the largest funders, invested in them. And so I just wanted to highlight that. If you think about businesses, you can have a lifestyle business, think about putting tech on top of that, and that becomes a very highly scalable business and increases your likelihood of getting funding. Next slide, please. Next slide. So I'm gonna go through some case studies. So this is actually a company, Canela Media, which means cinnamon, as you all know. Really interesting company. We made an investment in Canela Media about 3 years ago. Her seed round, she was just starting the company, Isabel Rafferty. This was her third company, definitely an experienced entrepreneur. Her company, Canela Media, is a streaming service for the Latino market, which shows on demand. You can watch television shows, series. She gets shows from Dominican Republic, from Mexico, Colombia, all over, licenses them. She was at the time not creating her own content. She now is doing that. She was basically licensing this content. How she was a bit different from, if you think about Amazon Prime or Netflix, it was ad supported. So basically, she was getting people to watch and then selling ads based on the number of eyeballs and people watching. Really interesting, when she went to go out and fundraise, she went to over 100 VCs in Silicon Valley, New York, top VCs, and they said, why would Latinos look at your service? They can just watch Netflix and Amazon Prime. The problem, or the issue was, and I knew this immediately when I saw this company because we had made an investment in Mocafy, and I knew that there were 70 million people in the United States who were underbanked and unbanked, and half of those were Black and Latino, is that if they don't have a credit card, they can't get Netflix, they can't get on Amazon Prime. So they had a blind spot. We did not. So we made an investment in her. The only funds that invested in her were funds that were led by women or funds that were led by people of color, including my fund. We're women and people of color. Let's fast forward. She was featured in Forbes magazine last year. She's one of the Latinos who raised the most money in the United States. She closed a $32 million round. She had every VC after her. And what she did was, we actually invested again. She actually gave us even more allocation to invest because we were there for her when no one was. She's on track to be $1 billion company very shortly. She had an incredible year last year. She's probably gonna double her revenue this year. So why this is important? because if funds like mine didn't exist, she would not have Canela Media. And so that's why it's really important that we have funders that look like myself, who understand the Latino market, who understand the Black market, the Asian market, markets that are typically overlooked, whereas in the United States, these are not small markets, these are massive markets. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about another case study, more on the innovative, investing models that possibly you in here in the Dominican Republic could think about. So one is 43 North. It's based in Buffalo. It's a $5 million annual pitch competition. I've happened to be a pitch judge for them for the past 6 years. It's been around for 7 years. The reason why they started it, Buffalo was a very heavy industry, steel, kind of old industries that aren't around too much anymore. And so they had basically industries died in Buffalo. And so they were thinking, we want to bring in startups and really drive the startup ecosystem in Buffalo. So how do we do that? So they created this $5 million annual pitch competition. They give $1 million to one startup. So they give $5 million, $1 million to each startups. But here's the catch. You have to move to Buffalo and you have to stay there for 2 years. They've gone on after 7 years. They basically have 64 portfolio companies that have gone on to raise over $1 billion, and their market value is $4.4 billion. They had a company go public, initial public offering to public equities last year, which was a big success. And the company Squire that I showed you, the barbershop apps company, well, actually I met the gentleman at 43 North who launched Squire. And so they're also an alumni of 43 North and have gone on, as I mentioned, to be valued at $700 million. Next slide, please. Another model that's really interesting is the revenue-based financing and business loans. So Founders First, I know the founder, Kim Folson. I've known her for a number of years. She has a $100 million fund. And what she does is she provides loans, regular, normal, traditional loans. So it could be a loan which has a term, or it could be revenue-based. What she saw that there was a lot of companies that were founded by women, underserved markets, women, veterans, people that don't live in big cities, but yet they have great companies. She focuses mainly on service businesses or lifestyle businesses, not the highly scalable ones, which aren't typically, VC backable kind of companies, but they need funding. And she looked at companies and said, for revenue, she's like, there are companies that have consistent revenue. They may have a government contract. They may have a contract with the federal government or the city or a state. So they have reoccurring revenue. And so she will provide a loan anywhere from $50,000 up to $1 million. And then what they do, they pay back the loan based on for the US companies are manufacturing here, also supply chain. With those kinds of things, American investors, American companies can have interest, and they could also be possibly co-investors for the businesses that you have. So with that, I say thank you and buenas noches, and thank you for having me.
For Carla and Lorene for those amazing keynotes. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the conference, our goal is to open up the conversation and build bridges between the United States and the Dominican Republic, which is why we have the privilege of receiving now on stage 6 guests who will bring years of experience to the table and to talk about collaboration between markets, the role of investors in the growth of the ecosystem. Now let's welcome them one by one as we read a brief introduction from their very extensive track record. First, he is CEO of Altio, the first fund administrator to launch private equity and venture capital funds in the Dominican Republic. He has more than 20 years of experience in fund management, financial advisory, asset management, corporate finance, and financial derivatives, structuring and sales in emerging and frontier markets at Morgan Stanley, Deutsche Bank, and Citibank. He is an active investor and board member in Lending Point, a unicorn in the online lending space in the US. Please welcome Raúl Hoyo. VC, and she is Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the University of Louisville. She is the founder of Story, Louisville's first co-working space, recognized by Louisville Business First with the 40 Under 40 Award, and participates on multiple boards, including GLI's Tech First and Wild Accelerator. Please welcome Natalia Bishop. Advisor, international consultant, and expert in the stock market and sustainability. After 15 years on Wall Street, she became CEO of the Dominican Republic Stock Exchange in 20. European CEO magazine. Please welcome Daris Estrella. Advisor and attorney with extensive experience in the legal, technology, and entertainment industries. She was named by Mergers and Acquisitions as the 2021 Top 25 Most Influential Women in Mid-Market M&A, and by Worth Magazine as one of the 16 financial powerhouses. She is currently the lead partner of Portfolio Rising America Funds 1 and 2, which invests in companies with founders of color, women, LGBTQI+, or companies with products or services addressing those markets. Please welcome one more time, Laureen Pendleton. She's president of the board at Enlaces, Angel Investors Network, and president of the board at Fundación Dominicana de Desarrollo. Economist with 8 years of experience on angel investing and She has been working in finance and fintech for the past 20 years. She has 10 years working in the nonprofit sector. She's a 3-time startup founder. She's part of Commonwealth Seed Capital Fund. Through her work with the investments of various foundations, she is currently with 30+ hedge, private equity, and real asset funds across the investment style spectrum. She has also served as an advisor and trustee to select high net worth families. Please welcome one more time, Carla Deering. Thank you all for joining us today. On the side, you will probably find one microphone. I believe there's that. You can turn it on right there. All right, so are we good? You have some water, okay. Thank you again for being here. I'm super excited to host this conversation, and thank you again, Lorraine and Carla, for providing us with such amazing insights from your perspective and your experience. Now, I would love to start off with Maria Virginia, president of Enlaces, Angel Investors Network, and talk a little bit. I would love to start with you to talk a little bit about the Dominican Republic landscape and what we've seen throughout the years and how much we've grown over the past years, especially from the angel investment perspective.
Many thanks for your question. I will first start talking about Enlaces, then later talk a little bit about what I've been doing in angel investing through Enlaces. Enlaces started in year 2008, and since then we have evolved, I would say exponentially. We worked very close with Escala, which is another angel investment network in South America, and with a lot of support from Big Lab. I would say up to now, we have invested in 23 startups, and our MOIC, multiple of investment capital, it's 2.49 for the last 2 years. And we are 50 angel investors, but also we have 6 funds that are working close to us. By the end of year 2002, we have invested almost up to $3 million, but most of the resources we have allocated it during the last 2 years. And as an early stage investor, angel investor, I do appreciate that we work as a team, because we don't go by ourselves investing, so it is a teamwork, and we learned a lot, and we have success stories that later we'll comment.
Amazing, thank you so much. Now, turning it over to you, Raul, and yesterday we had an amazing conversation with other folks, and we were talking about, we have a lot of very talented entrepreneurs, and some of them have gone a long way, but at the same time, there is a need to have a real success story the way that, other markets have, and you made a great symbol with baseball here in the DR, which I would love for you to bring back, as I think you drove the point very, very well. Now, could you tell us a little bit about why is it so relevant to get that, big success story, and why hasn't it happened at this point? And maybe talk a little bit about your experience as a board member at Linden Point.
Thank you, Miyuki, and thank you for inviting me. A few years ago, I had a webinar that Ange realized during Entrepreneurship Week, and I remember I had to explain what the entrepreneurship ecosystem was. And at that point in time, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago maybe, I remember specifically stating there is no exit. So in the Dominican ecosystem back then, if you were only looking at the Dominican Republic, there was no exit. And what I really meant to say at that point in time was that there was no chance for that big hurrah. There was no chance for that one example of somebody making it big and therefore influencing everybody that comes along. And like you said, I used the example yesterday with baseball. We all know Dominican Republic is known as a baseball country. And while today that's known pretty much worldwide, the fact of the matter is there were no Dominican baseball players in the major leagues until about the same time as Jackie Robinson was playing. After that person made it, which was Mr. Rojas Alou, now we have about 14% of the entire major leagues is Dominican. But that had to happen. Every kid in every barrio here in the Dominican Republic and in every small town had to see that Rojas Alou could make it to the major leagues and could become famous and play alongside Jackie Robinson and Willie Mays and whoever else he played with. And we haven't necessarily had that here in the Dominican Republic. And what I used to believe, and I no longer do, was that we didn't have the exit here locally. And I say I no longer believe it, and part of the reason we decided to launch our first venture capital fund a year and a half ago, and it's been successful, it's a $50 million fund, is that we don't need to look only at the Dominican Republic. In fact, it's really important that entrepreneurs that are looking for something other than lifestyle business, and I think your example was great. There's a very big difference between a lifestyle business and a really scalable business. And a really scalable business needs a huge market. And there's absolutely no reason why Dominicans cannot aspire to create companies that can eventually become an acquisition target by a Google, by an Apple, or an IPO target in the United States. And by the way, now we do have the possibility of an IPO in the Dominican Republic. So I think as far as the ecosystem is concerned, we have everything we need. I think we have a huge amount of talent in the Dominican Republic. I spent 15 years outside of the DR, came back 12 years ago. All of my employees, or 95% of my employees, are Dominican, and they're amazing. They're better than most of the U.S. employees that I work with. It's just we have the talent. I think some of you brought up yesterday branding. DR is great at branding, and there's a ton of other examples. So I think we have everything we need. What we need is that first person or that first company to really make it, and be an example for everyone that's coming along and say, maybe I can make it myself, just like Mr. Rojas Salud did 40, 50 years ago in baseball.
Now, you bring up a really interesting point in saying that we don't have to limit, Dominican entrepreneurs to just work locally and to actually be part of, or strive to go to a bigger market like the U.S. But in that same sense, then we, bring up the conversation about underserved founders. And I want to turn this question to you, Darius. Do you think that the definition that was brought up earlier around an underserved founder being a founder that belongs to one of the groups that has less opportunities than others, in groups that belong maybe to, Black, Brown, LGBTQ communities, do you think that applies in the same matter to Dominican founders in the same definition?
Absolutely, and thank you for the invitation, by the way. It's the same thing here. So underserved founders, as Carla mentioned at the beginning, and Lorraine again, and now you are those people who don't have access to the same resources and opportunities that more privileged founders do. And this means that they don't have access to the same capital, they don't have access to the mentoring, to the guidance, to the follow-up. And for a startup, you need more than just money. You need all of these things, right? We saw the stats. And it's the same here. We know, for example, that women don't have access to the same financing as men do. When I saw those numbers, Lorraine, I was like, I knew it was bad, but it's really bad. And it's the same here. So I think it's our responsibility and the ecosystem to make sure that we create an environment where we level the playing field, where you have maybe targeted funds for those, for those founders, where you provide spaces where they can do networking, which is so important, or you create spaces for networking, so you have access to that. The mentoring, the guidance, the follow-up, everything that you need besides the money to make sure that your business takes off and develops. So to make the answer short, yes, I think it's the same thing. It has a lot of similarities.
Yeah, and I think we all agree on that point. Now, I want to turn it to you, Lorraine, and based on all the data and examples that you provided with us, I wanted to ask you specifically, what strategies or what even policies have been implemented, from a public standpoint or even from a private standpoint to really help that underserved market and those underserved founders to really close that gap between, not really finding opportunities to actually creating them, but as an ecosystem, being New York, what it is at the moment, what specific things can you maybe highlight that were very helpful that potentially a market like the Dominican Republic might be able to learn from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So where I'm at, I live in New York City, and then also New Jersey. In terms of policies, so New York just announced a few months ago, they've launched a $150 million fund to invest in underrepresented, underserved founders. And so, which is really great. And they're targeting early stage because they see that as being the biggest need. So not necessarily a company that has several million in revenue, annual recurring revenue, but people who are just starting out, pre-seed, seed stage, more earlier. New Jersey just made an announcement as well. The governor there did the same thing. New York is also targeting founders, but then also fund managers like myself who are investing in these underserved markets. They actually created a $100 million fund to invest in those fund managers. New Jersey is doing the exact same thing. They have a $300 million fund, what they're calling Evergreen, not necessarily just underserved. I'm actually on Friday when I get back, I was invited to, invitation only to meet with the state in New Jersey. They set aside $10 million of that $300 million, which I think is ridiculous, and I will tell them that. But, I mean, it's something. But anyway, I digress. But they are doing, and states are doing that. So, New York, in the area where I live, New York, New Jersey is doing that. So that's from a government standpoint. On the state level, there's some programs for, federal, the United States. And then you have companies that are doing things, they see this as, really important. I know for a fact, like Procter & Gamble, which is a big, consumer company, they have been doing this. They have Procter & Gamble Ventures, and they look at the demographics in the United States. By 2046 is going to be a majority minority, meaning the Latino market in the United States is the fastest growing market, than, African Americans and Asians and other and then also, anyway, it's going to be a majority minority, and because they're a consumer company, they're saying they need to invest in the next generation of companies, and they're looking at diverse companies or companies that are addressing underserved markets, because they said if they don't do that, that's strategic imperative for the success of their company in the future. So companies like Procter & Gamble, some other companies have created, Google has done that. They've created, a fund or just programs where they're targeting, underserved market.
Amazing, and I'm glad that you brought the government up because, those things, one way or another, it's pushing also founders to be, on the lookout for those funds. But going back to the Dominican Republic, we've discussed how limiting and how little our laws and our policies really help entrepreneurs move forward. But not just relying on the policies, but what challenges, and to our Dominican guests, what challenges do we think we should be addressing in a more direct way, not just from the entrepreneur standpoint, but also from the investor's standpoint? Maybe Maria Virginia, you can discuss a little bit about that.
I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to improve at a faster rate. I don't know if I understood completely your question, because I'm also focused in what we want at Enlaces, because we have had several success stories. For example, with Angel Boot Camps, and we have received support from several institutions. We've done that through few years ago when it was present. Now we can do all that online, and there's a lot of education, communication, networking that can be done like that here. As Raul said, the entrepreneurship ecosystem, the founders that we have here are outstanding. I think it's an opportunity for both ways.
And from a follow-up to what you're saying, have there been specific challenges, you as a group, as the Angel Investors Network, that you face, maybe having to do with lack of policy, or with the entrepreneurs itself, that you look as a group and that you consider a challenge, per se?
You mean to invest?
Yes.
In minority, underrepresented?
Or in general with the portfolio that you have?
I think maybe we are small still, so we don't have a lot of deal flows. So we have to choose very well, and we do our work regardless any issue. I don't know. It's and then if there's talent, we support the talent.
And I believe you're also looking not just Dominican entrepreneurs in the Dominican Republic,
I
but
have to say that, and that's something that we have done, and that have helped us a lot. Not only to for our numbers, but also for the learning experience of the ecosystem. And that has been great.
Amazing, thank you. Yes, of course.
So one thing that I see is just the lack of knowledge of where to even go. I know a lot of people ask me, and entrepreneurship is not my expertise. I come more from the capital markets, but people come to me and say, you know, I have this project, where do I go? They don't know that Enlaces exist, or they don't know, and I don't know, I don't have the answer, but it's having access to those networks because they don't even know where to start. So that's a big issue.
Correct.
Yeah, I was going to say, and this ties into the question you asked Darius earlier, I think the way that the underserved is defined in the U.S. and here is a little different. Whereas in the U.S. you can define minorities as underserved. In the Dominican Republic, where we're so mixed race, it's not really a race issue. It's an access issue. It's how do I get access to capital? And capital, until recently, was not a capital markets thing. It was what are the families that have money? As that has changed, and there is a capital market, I think that is changing to the point where there's an Enlaces. There's a VC fund that has $50 million, which for the U.S. is a micro fund, but for DR, it's plenty of money. So I think a big component of this is education. Is how do we get that next generation to start thinking really big, and hence to have to ask themselves, how do I get access? And start learning about other things like capital markets, and then realize there is access. There's an Enlaces. I can literally go to Enlaces, and that's my first step. But most people don't know because they haven't been educated to think about big. They're thinking about the lifestyle business, or they're thinking about a DR-centric business as opposed to a truly scalable business.
Amazing, and that reminds me of one of the things that we touched on one of the meetings that we had yesterday. Yesterday we met with different universities, like we met with UNIBE, UTESA, and also other institutions and associations like AdoFintech and Pro Dominicana. And one of the things that we discussed in that meeting was in terms of education and the fact that when entrepreneurs launch their businesses, or the reason they start their businesses is mostly on a survival basis because they need to pay the bills. And it's very difficult to, jump or really look at businesses as something different and break that island mindset that we were discussing. And one of the points that they brought up was the fact that in our schools, or very early on, that isn't really a subject matter, the way that it might be in the States, for example, where we encourage that entrepreneurial mindset, in the kids. It's not the case for the Dominican Republic. And Natalia was pushing rebels, universities to become rebels, and to actually, form coalitions and to really drive those efforts as a community and not just isolated efforts, in the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And I wanted to ask Natalia, to bring back her take on that, and, you being a part of the University of Louisville in the Department of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. In terms of education, what do you think is key to overcome that and to not have, people starting businesses and founders looking at their business with a mindset of, survival and, to start businesses for the wrong reasons, so to speak?
First of all, don't listen to me because I'm crazy, but but I think that one of the things that, in a way, you can really easily gloss over is the technology aspect of this. So we looked at the slide of barbers and then a super scalable business, the SaaS space, and it's really easy to just say, oh, okay, just sprinkle some tech on it, and magically it's going to then become this giant scalable company. But if you don't actually have that, who sprinkles the tech on it, right? Who does that? And thankfully it's 2023, and there's tons of no-code options to validate your product and really get you there. But I think what sometimes ends up happening is that you don't even see it. You can't even imagine it, to your point earlier, not just because it hasn't happened before, but because you don't believe that you have it. If I'm cutting hair, what do I know about coding, right? If I am taking pictures, what do I know about co-working? If I am, so I think there's a little bit of a mindset shift that has to happen, and universities are where you find yourself, where you find your path in life. And and that's school in general, right? If you're being fed the thought, the inception from a very early age that you don't have to limit yourself in any way, because technology can help you get there. And if you don't know somebody, then find somebody who knows somebody, right? So I think that there's that responsibility of very much inceptioning those thoughts and making, I think universities have to also shift a little bit in the belief, which could seem like a cannibalism sort of concept of, hey, a 4-year degree is awesome, but it's not for everyone, right? If you live in a rural part of the country, you may not be able to have the access to going all the way to, you were telling me it's kind of far away, right? Even if you live in Santo Domingo, it's kind of a drive for some of these universities. What are the options to make satellite campuses happen in partnership with some of the people that are sitting here on this panel, right? To create fellowships, to create different types of programming that could be done virtually or hybrid, right? We got to get creative and start taking people out of that mindset that if I want to be a technologist, I have to be in this thing for 4 years and then, do all the fellowships and internships, and then I won't get there until I'm 7 years in. How do we make that just quicker, that shorten that pathway of thought? But I think to your point of collisions earlier, I think that, and I'll say it's an island and a boat, so you have to make this analogy because, we're in an island. But one of the things that we were talking about is that we got to all row in the same direction. But to do that, you have to pick the direction, and you have to collectively agree what your success needs to be. You talk about an exit, and that sounds really awesome. That should be your ultimate goal. But there are other success metrics that you're going to need to put together as a team. That's going to be government. That's going to be, institutions like Enlaces, and everything is going to be individuals, right? We were talking a little bit earlier about the access to capital from outside. Well, who has a network from outside the country that has capital that can come in and be angel investors, right? So I think it just takes a little bit of food and beer and some conversations, and I think you guys are going to be on the right track.
Amazing, thank you. Now, Carla, turning it over to you, you have a lot of experience working, alongside the government in the deployment of funds, and also really making really important impact in specific communities around your community. And in your keynote, you also touched on the importance of leadership. And a lot of times it comes up in the conversation that, the responsibility of something not working, and that's something being so big as, the entrepreneurship ecosystem in the Dominican Republic, sometimes it's just very easy to pinpoint it, and make the government responsible for things. And we've been discussing that leadership does not, it comes in many different forms. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about, the work that you do alongside, not inside the government, but alongside it. And also, how does that translate and your work bringing other partners to initiatives as a coalition or as a group that can actually make a bigger impact, not just, having it rely on just one partner?
Well, one key thing, when you say journey to investment ready, and we were talking about different kinds of capital, but especially venture capital. But really, when you want to make a change that's much, much bigger and broader like that, there's other kinds of capital. There's government capital. There's educational institutions. In our market, there's philanthropy, which I know is not as mature of a market here, but of course there's philanthropy in our market that would be interested in initiatives in your market. So what I really do, to your question, is I think very broadly about capital. So if we have something we want to achieve, I wouldn't hold it to just the angels. Or just, right, I would actually think very, very broadly about if this is an initiative and it's going to cost X, everybody's going to pay their fair share to make it happen. And I will say that I alluded in my comments that frankly, we kind of created a parallel system to do that, but we didn't leave anybody out. And when I say we, I'm talking about Natalia and our colleague Tarek, and yourself, Miyuki, and the work you do with us. But we also have an ally at the state who now has made it to one of the top positions in our economic cabinet. And we have an ally in the west end of Louisville where he's lifting up hundreds, literally, of black-owned businesses. So we decided as leaders that we were not going to duplicate efforts, right, in terms of the ecosystem. I feel like Natalia did us a huge favor by going to the university because she roped them in to some extent to the goals and the pledge not to duplicate efforts. So it's thinking creatively about capital, and it's building a leadership coalition that does have all the key players, maybe not in all the top positions, but the ones who are willing to move resources to get it done. And of course, there does have to be a plan, and you are rowing in the same direction, but moving from what is that plan, what is possible, what is that plan, and then how do we make it happen with a broad view on capital? I would say that's what I would describe, and I mentioned in my talk that we feel a little momentum, even though the national stats, right, are not there. We're kind of like not letting our regional market stop by using our relationships. I don't know, Natalia, I mean, you're such a big part of this, but.
Well, thank you for that. But I think one of the things that I want to add on is that sometimes, and we've said education several times, not just from the academic side, but, just even educating angels to continue to bring more capital in. One of the things that you'll hear often, and Lorraine, correct me if you've heard this before, but is, black and brown founders or underrepresented founders are typically overeducated and undercapitalized. So now you have resources going into that, hey, we're going to teach you how to grow your business, and you go and you do it, and then there's no money to actually do something at the other end. So I think like really creating that balance as you're building this ecosystem. And for the founders in the room, I don't know how many of you are emprendedores out here, but it's your responsibility to not just show the BAM, right, but actually have some metrics, actually have some meat behind this thing, because your pot is small, right? You have to stop thinking you only get one shot, right? That's one thing. We have to stop sort of this self-demeaning belief of like, oh, it's just one time, and if I don't make it, because everybody else is getting 17 shots in California, doesn't mean we're going to get 17 shots. We may get 1, 2, or 3, like Canela Media, right? And that's all great, but it's going to take experience. And if you don't have that shot, the whole thing that we talked about is 30% of co-founders that have 2 people on their founding team get more money. So go find someone that has done it before, and then build your company with them. So there's a little bit of responsibility on the other end to not just sit and say, well, I have a great brand and I have this and I have that. How do you really put those metrics together so that you're rowing with your investors too, right? And at the same time feeding the ecosystem.
Awesome. I want to ask a question, to anyone who wants to jump in and share their take on this, but you constantly hear, or I've heard several times here from entrepreneurs and from investors that investors can find entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs cannot find investors. And it really makes you wonder, why is that? And you touched earlier on a point, Darius, where it's like, we really need to, communicate, but also make sure we're there for them and they know. But going a little bit deeper on that, because I would love to hear your perspective, and also from you guys, if you've heard similar things from your markets. But here in the Dominican Republic, from the investors' perspective, from the investors group, and even, you know, as a market in general, and people who can actually support entrepreneurs, how do you feel about that phrase? How do you feel about, you know, investors not finding entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs saying that they cannot find help? Not just obviously not in the education, but in terms of, you know, capital in this case. And as you mentioned, Raul, there are opportunities and there are options now. But why do you think there's still this feeling that there is a gap and that there aren't opportunities for Dominican entrepreneurs?
I'll start out by saying that when we started our VC fund November 2021, so it's been less than a year and a half, I assumed very little to no money would be going to Dominican ventures, quite frankly. And it's been a pleasant surprise that we've had 3 that we're already investing in and possibly a 4th. So it's been a good surprise. I would say that I haven't had the issue that we don't have entrepreneurs wanting to present to us. We have, or people with ideas wanting to present to us, and I distinguish that from an entrepreneur. On the contrary, I think one of my biggest issues is how do I make sure I'm seeing everything that's being sent to me, or how do I make sure that our team is filtering all of these, because there's so much that is coming through. But on my end, if I ever say I don't see enough entrepreneurs, it's really I'm not seeing those people that are thinking about scalability. I think the U.S. probably has a different problem where there might not be a path to profitability, whereas here we have lots of path to profitability on lifestyle businesses, as opposed to scalability. And that's why I keep coming back to that idea of I want to make sure that everybody in DR knows you got to start thinking about global scalability. Because if you have that idea, if you have the team to make it happen, and if you're thinking that way, and I know there's a talent here, the money there will be money, and it'll first come from DR, and then it'll come from other places. We have a great diaspora of Dominicans in the United States. That's one of the first places that it can come from, and eventually from philanthropy. But that scalability issue, I keep coming back to it because that's what I don't see. I have a bunch of people with business ideas but are not necessarily thinking about scalability.
I would like also to add to what Raul said. Here, there are other good initiatives, and there, at least in the entrepreneurial environment, they know where to go. For example, besides Enlaces, there are others as, for example, Banreservas, which is an incubator. There are few co-working spaces that are dedicating a lot of effort to see projects, and they're working in teams. And at least I have I've been present in many challenges, in many concursos, how do you say, like startup weekends and things, competitions. And then everybody knows each other. Sometimes you even prefer on a Sunday evening to see, to go to be with those, many entrepreneurs that have the vibe, that has the energy, and that's why one of the reasons that the ecosystem is a little, it's not that it's a little bit, it's packed. It's not all over. Then regarding investments, I think there's a room for improvement. Also, there are many family offices that are doing investments, but I think there's opportunities that we get better. We all can get better.
Great. Now, just going, now towards our last questions, I wanted to ask, from Lorraine, Natalia, and Carla, what, and from what you've seen, in the past few days, and from what you've learned, I would like to ask you, what encouragement or what pieces of advice would you give, not the ecosystem, but particularly the people who are focused on supporting entrepreneurs and providing capital, to then ask from the Dominican side, what piece of advice would you give entrepreneurs that you are looking for and looking forward to meet, and you mentioned something very important, which is the scalability part, but passing along those advices, I would love to turn to you first and say, what can we encourage, or maybe invite investors or people who are willing to, go into ventures. What will you ask them to consider, or what advice you would give them to apply to the Dominican Republic?
I'll throw one out that we didn't really cover a lot today, but we're going to talk a lot tomorrow in the investor workshop. Mentoring. There is so much support that individual companies need, and when you put yourself out there as an investor, you put yourself out there as an advisor and as a supporter, and what we've done a little bit in our ecosystem is trust each other and collaborate. So if Natalia's mentoring someone and they're coming before a fund that I'm the decision maker on, I find that out and I'm like, okay, then let me help, right? So you could say those are the traditional access mechanisms that exist for others that we're trying to bring to, guess what they are? It's exactly what they are. And so I think it's the investors probably that are going to have to take a lot of time to help the entrepreneurs. So I'm just going to leave it there.
So kind of double clicking on what you were saying about there's a lot of lifestyle businesses and not these scalable. But I think you saw in the case study, Founders First, which is focused on lifestyle businesses. So I guess what I'm saying is I think investors meet the entrepreneurs where they are. And so I think there could be all kinds of funding models. It doesn't have to be VC, highly scalable, venture backable companies. And that's what was, I thought, really interesting about Founders First, is that she was seeing that a lot of underserved entrepreneurs, they just didn't have highly scalable businesses. She herself was an entrepreneur. She had a 3-time entrepreneur at a tech company. She sold it. But she said she didn't find a lot of business like that. So she was trying to come up with a way to meet them where they were or where they are. And that's what she came up with, Founders First, is this revenue-based loans and then term loans. But, if they have a good annual revenue stream, they have contracts. And she saw that as mitigating the risk of them not defaulting on the loans and not being able to pay them back. So I think there should be, what I would say is, for investors here, you'll have your venture VCs, that's great. You'll have angel investors, but I think there's room for other funding models. And so I think more of that's happening in the United States. And I think that's something, if you have a lot of entrepreneurs that have a lot of lifestyle businesses here, think about how you can support them, that you're making money and getting your money back and but also helping them. So that's what I would say.
I think that one of the things that we are kind of talking about with capital and mentoring, that's your time, your money. But one thing that Tarek said really beautifully yesterday or the day before was the part where he was talking about belief capital. And that's something we haven't really touched on. And one of the things that maybe you don't have a fund, maybe you're not an investor, but you are someone who has a position in your society here where you know a lot of people, you're well networked, or you know a lot of corporation leaders. And, all it takes is for a startup here to have a pilot within a small, medium-sized business that they can take as proof of concept to scale that particular business into the U.S., right? Maybe you have alumni connections. Maybe you're someone who knows someone. So think about that. What are other ways in which you can participate, even if it isn't just with your time or your talent or your money? So that's one thing. And then on the other side of the equation, specifically to those small business founders that are lifestyle businesses that are hustling day in and day out, trying to survive and doing the thing, and they haven't even thought about scale. Or you're starting to think about it. You're starting to think, hey, I have my third location. I think I have something. Go ahead and light whatever it is that you think on fire and let it burn. Because what you're going to do with that when you scale is going to be different. And you have to start listening to your customers and really go back to the drawing board and listen and listen and listen, and then take care of yourselves. Because in an underserved market, being a founder is hard. And if you're in an underserved market and you yourself are under-resourced or under-access, it's really, really, really hard. So it is about having some balance and taking care of yourself. We talked about not giving up. We talked about keeping going no matter what. But guess what? Sometimes you should give up, right? Sometimes the revenue model sucks, and let's try something else, right? So be open and listen to the advice from these guys and ladies up here. Because it is really, really important that you're not married to that solution. Be in love to the problem, with the problem that you're trying to solve, and continue to iterate. Don't do it like everybody else is doing. This is for the ecosystem. You don't look at California, don't look at New York, don't look at Louisville. You're not any of those people or any of those countries or states. You are you here. You have a special sauce. You have to figure out what makes you different, and then capitalize on that.
Awesome. Now turning it to our DR side and starting with you, Darius. I know you don't necessarily work directly with founders, but you do work and have a lot of knowledge in the market. You know, what advice would you give, people who are on this journey, people who need more education, but also access to capital and need to connect and to connect with those ideas that can take them, to the next level and to help them scale and all of that. What are you seeing in the market that could be helpful for them to understand and be part of, of the journey to get investment ready?
Well, as I said, as Raul said, lack of access and lack of knowledge, and what Carla said, mentoring, but also the network. If you don't know, because I do have people come to me and say, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know where to go. Ask, use your network. I don't know, face whatever, use your network. I have this great project. Can somebody tell me where to go? But doing that connection, so the mentoring, the networking. I think also that I didn't know about the co-working spaces because I saw that in New York, which, New York City invested in infrastructure for co-working where the founders could pay very cheap money to go work there, and they provide the mentoring and the networking. So I'm glad, I didn't know we had that here. I'm glad to know that. But those are the things that, again, I've said it before, it's not just money. You need so much more than that to make the project successful, to make it grow, to make it develop. So that's where I see that we can improve here.
Awesome. Maria, you want to jump in?
Everything has been said, but I'm going to say something else. I'm also involved in microfinance. So they're entrepreneurs, and they don't have access to anything. And you can see so many wonderful experiences, not only here, all over the world, but I can talk about here. They are learning about technology. They are doing a lot of interesting things in tourism here. And what matters to me, besides growing and have a nice, portfolio, is that they pay. They pay better than any banks, commercial banks, here and all over the world. So it's just they have the drive, and they need to. I think there's just an opportunity just to have all the things that we've talked here and to keep on improving.
Amazing. Raul?
Thank you, Miyuki. I'm going to jump off something Daddy said, she said, it's not just about the money. I'd like to posit that the money is the least important part of what you get from an investor if you get a good investor. And when there's lack of knowledge, it's even more important. I go to your mentoring. It's much easier from my position to get an extra dollar. It's a lot harder for me to get an extra minute. And adaptability is an entrepreneur's most important asset. And if you're willing to get a good investor that helps you learn and you adapt to what you're learning from, it's a lot more important than the money.
That's great. And the only thing I would add to all of that, please, yes. The only thing I would add to that is to really encourage entrepreneurs to ask and approach people like you, because sometimes it just feels, with this mindset that I'm not ready, or I'm not there, or I'm not big enough. Why would I, approach an investor? But you can literally approach, people like them and ask them, if you don't know, what do I need? This is what I have. Even if it's, 10 pages of a lot of things you need to get done, but at least you have the answer and and you're going to work on it. But sometimes entrepreneurs, I feel, are waiting for this, moment in time where my business is going to be ready, but what does ready look like? And, this is what we've been discussing, and we'll keep discussing throughout the workshops. But if you don't ask, if you don't know, if you don't ask for help, if you don't tell someone, I need to get a person with this profile, do you know a person? So it's like we need to, shift that mindset of waiting for the answer to just drop on my lap, and rather, ask around. And the worst thing you can get is, I don't know, but maybe try this person, so that person can take you to another person. So I think, everything we've discussed, I think, is very relevant for investors and funds and people who are interested in understanding what it takes and what it looks like in our different markets, but also, entrepreneurs to really understand that there are opportunities, there is a way, there is a framework, and it's just a matter of trying to get that access. And even though we know there are limitations and there is a lot behind it, but the worst thing that could happen is, if you don't ask, is just you'll be sitting in the same spot forever. And I think that is one of the key things that we need to start shifting that mindset around. But I would love to spend the whole evening just asking more questions and picking your brains, but I truly appreciate your time, and I would love everyone to give a round of applause again for our guests. It's been really a pleasure to hear from all of you, and our goal with this program, through the meetings that we've had, through this conference, the keynotes, and the workshops that we'll be holding, is to, again, not just open up these conversations, but hopefully for these conversations to help us lead to actions. And we've already pinpointed very important things that we can follow up on, and tomorrow we'll be seeing more of that on our workshop. So again, thank you very much. And to all of you, thank you for your time and for being here, educating and listening and learning from our guests. And to you at home also, thank you for joining us virtually. And now we will hold a little networking session so that you can get to pick their brains a little bit more if you want, and also have the opportunity to learn from each other, and to introduce your businesses if you're here as an entrepreneur, or ask if you're interested in becoming potentially an investor. I truly want to thank the U.S. Embassy in Santo Domingo for being our key partner and the main protagonist of making all of this happen. Also, alongside with Wild Accelerator, Velo Group, Enlaces, Dominicano, and Palanta Dominicana for making this program happen. And to all of you who have joined us today, to all of you here on stage with me, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.